The problem now is if you want to be a writer, this you can just go onto the web and or social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. There are thousands of writers out there. What makes you distinct? If you start looking at like that and trying to compare yourself, especially in a country as big as India, there's nowhere to go, right? Because you'll always feel like what I'm doing is not significant. So I think it's much better to be driven by the inside, by internal or intrinsic factors most of the time. Occasionally, you can use these short-term tricks to, give you a little bit of short-term boost. But long-term, the more that GPS is anchored around these concepts of purpose, autonomy, and mastery, the more likely we are to flourish in our careers and lives more broadly.
So today we are joined by Mr. Sharat Jeevan. He is the founder of eBay for Charity, Ambition School Leadership, and STIR Education. He recently started Intrinsic Labs and is set to publish Intrinsic, a manifesto to reignite our inner drive by the time this podcast is released. He's also a huge advocate for intrinsic motivation and aims to help people understand what drives them through all his ventures. And without any further ado, we'll get straight into the questions. Ratvij?
Yeah. So, Sharat, why don't we start with understanding what intrinsic motivation is? And while we are at a time assuming that we might also have to talk about extrinsic motivation and amotivation as well.
Yeah, no, great point, Rich, as well. And I think part of the way of thinking about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, as you mentioned, is that think of it like going on a car journey in India, right? And you can either go on LPG or diesel, and you have these very choking fumes, which is I know it's a big part of Indian cities as well, or we can glide with kind of electric energy, and I guess that's almost the same way. We both get there. You'll get to the place you want to go, but it's all about how pleasant the ride is. And extrinsic motivation is about doing something because something else is promised at the end. You go to a job because of its status, because there's money promised that because of it, or you do something because there's a bonus, or because you'll be punished if you don't do it. Those are all kind of classic extrinsic motivators. Intrinsic motivation is, again, like that clean electric fuel. It's doing something because you genuinely want to do it. It's inherently or intrinsically enjoyable, even pleasurable. It's fulfilling. And you really are going on the ride with real joy. And I guess it's a bit like good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, that in general, the more we can live our lives with that principle of intrinsic motivation, the more fulfilled and sustainable our lives tend to be. And that's true whether we're in the world of work, in education, as parents, citizens, spouses, you name it.
I think we can get straight into more of the nitty-gritties of intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So is intrinsic motivation greater than extrinsic motivation in some way?
Yeah, so again, I think greater maybe a little bit too strong, but broadly, it's a better alternative. I would agree with that here as well. And how do we try to make that the core? And what we're learning about intrinsic motivation, it's not really about things like money, status, perks, all these things. If you take a job example, these things we know can demotivate us if they're not there. They're what motivation thinking or theory would call hygiene factors, right? So we all need to put bread on the table. We need to feed our families. All of these things are important. We need to be paid fairly. But beyond that, it's these higher order intrinsic motivation that tend to drive us. So my research shows a lot around the need for purpose. So the idea of how our work, or what we do helps and serves others. A sense of autonomy, that we are at the wheel driving that car that I mentioned in the way we want to. In India, of course, there are many backseat drivers. So how do you try and keep moving forward in the way that you think is right and suited to you? And that sense of mastery, becoming a better and better driver as you go on the road, right? And whatever's coming in front of it, whether it's a bike or a pedestrian or an occasional bullock, being able to swerve and keep driving well. So those ideas of purpose, knowing what we do helps and serves others, autonomy, being at the wheel and being in control of our lives, mastery, getting better and better at what we do. There's 30 years of research from amazing scientists around the world that validates these three things. What I tried to do with the book that you mentioned, Intrinsic, and also the work I do practically now, is help individuals and organizations embody those three principles of purpose, autonomy, mastery in everything we do, and making it core to how we think about our motivation.
Awesome. So I am working on a career exploration and career counseling platform where we have conceptualized that when somebody goes about making a career decision, they should base it upon intrinsic motivation and not extrinsic motivation. So but there's very little research that I have personally done. So I would love to know your take on it. Do you think when somebody makes a career decision, how should they base it on either intrinsic motivation or extrinsic motivation?
Yeah, so I think there are two sort of ways of looking at it, Trish, as well. So if you take a long-term perspective, you're thinking about a career, you're in college or you're in school and you're thinking about what to do next, the more you can make decisions on intrinsic factors, the better. And sometimes that means doing things that are very unconventional. I'm the son of Indian doctors. They were trained in Chennai. I decided not to fulfill the family profession. Most of my uncles, aunts, more because I believe it wasn't really suited to my version of purpose, autonomy, and mastery, though, of course, it's an amazing profession. And I think in India now, what I've observed in the labor market is that often things that are quite niche, but where you have a genuine passion and genuine expertise, you can do something you enjoy doing, but also be successful. And let me just give you an example. My cousin went to college just outside Chennai, and one of his friends is called Jacob. He was an engineer in quite a well-known engineering school. He decided to drop all that stuff and become a wedding planner, right? And you can imagine that, and eventually he was the DJ at my wedding, in fact, and so in Chennai. So it's not. I'm sure his parents must have had a little bit of a some up and down things. In the book Intrinsic, I talked to a gentleman called Gaurav Shah who could have got into IIT, decided not to do it, and instead went off and built an education NGO that's been very successful called 321. So both of these guys have been incredibly successful in what they do. And I think they're very distinctive. They bring a real passion, a real difference to what they do in a way that they may not have been if they'd just been again, engineering is an amazing profession, but for them, that wasn't quite the right intrinsic drive they went for. So I think trying to find these areas where we can be unique and distinctive is very important for career success. I think when you're in a job, there's another question about, even if it's not the ideal job right now, you can also do things to make it more motivating in the shorter term, but also think about how to get to that longer term place where you really are able to nurture all your talents as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I'll just be heading into college later this year. And like you, my parents are also medicos, but I'm not going into the medical field as is generally expected of children of doctors. And I'd like to think that I'm doing whatever I'm pursuing is because of what I enjoy, what I think has the most potential, whatever the reason may be. But I just wanted to ask, how do I know whether I am intrinsically motivated? And what are a few key questions that I could ask myself to check that?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. And do you have an idea of what you may want to do instead? Clearly, it's not medicine, but any ideas so far of what you're thinking about?
So I'm pursuing economics and political science, but we'll see where it goes. I don't really have a plan.
Okay. I studied economics as well as an undergraduate, and congratulations on the college. It sounds really exciting. So I guess I would ask, the first question on purpose would be about, can I find a kind of an area of work where I can genuinely help and serve others? I think a lot of times, we're trained, I have an MBA background as well. We're trained to think about our life in terms of job descriptions, titles, what company am I? Am I a VP or MD or whatever the sort of hierarchy is? I think a much better way is to not worry about all that stuff, but start by can I find something where I really feel every day I wake up and I feel what I'm doing is contributing in some way, and how do you make that the core of what you do? If you do wake up with that sense, what it means is that you will be successful almost certainly in your job. And you probably will get that VP position or that MD position or whatever the equivalent is, right? But I think if we target that the extrinsic stuff, if you were asking about that at the beginning, that's where problems can start to happen. So I'd first ask that question on purpose. Is there an area of work that I'm interested in because I feel it can make a big difference, and where I myself as a young leader can make a difference in that sphere? So in this example of Jacob I mentioned, one of the things he was really exceptional at, and I've been to many weddings in India. He was an exceptionally good communicator. He's very, very professional. He thought, look, the wedding industry is a very, pretty antiquated, fairly out of, old-fashioned way of doing things. I can bring a level of communication, professionalism, and he's a real people person. He really loved people. He loved weddings. He wanted to make a difference. That passion was so strong. Working with him was so night and day different than working with a traditional Indian wedding planner, right? So, what can you bring to this area of work that's unique to you, that is really deeply about your personality? The second thing, I think, that this idea of autonomy, let's apply that. Is this an area of work where you feel you can carve your own path to a large degree? It doesn't mean you can break all the rules, maybe at the beginning especially, but where you feel there's something where you have that freedom to drive your career and take it into new directions. And what I often advise young people to do when they're thinking about new careers is find a wicked problem to solve. Wicked as in like the wicked Wizard of Oz and so on. And by that, I mean a problem that doesn't have an easy technical answer. So if you're dealing with issues, for example, around health systems, which is of course so important now, inequality, a major scientific breakthrough, technology, any of these things, these are huge problems where there's no easy answer. If you get lost in the problem and almost see yourself as like a scientist, trying to discover more and more new ideas in that problem area, that's a great way to always feel motivated and never feel you've got to the answer at the end of the day. So that autonomy question is also one where if we can find that really important problem we want to solve, that can help a lot. And the final thing I think is around mastery. And can you find a professional area of work where you're always going to be able to develop new skills? And a lot of times I think we tend to obsess early on in our careers more on the technical skills. So if you're an accountant, for example, will you be able to do a balance sheet well, or produce the management accounts, or do the financial analysis? But more and more of modern work is about the non-technical. It's about mastering these human skills around collaboration, communication, influence. So, an accountant in the future, I don't think will see themselves as someone who produces the management accounts. That more and more will be automated, or at least a large part. But there's someone who influences their CEO to help them make good business decisions through the information they're providing, right? It's the same job, but how we think about that job and what mastery looks like is very different. So those are three kind of pointers there. And I think if you have those as a rough kind of guide, a GPS, if you like, in the car, you can experiment and try different things and see which of those give you that right combination of purpose, autonomy, and mastery.
Awesome. So, I get the broad idea of intrinsic motivation and how to maybe foster it. But then one question that arises usually in my mind is, does extrinsic motivation help you foster intrinsic motivation in some way? Can we do that? Or if we bring extrinsic motivation into the picture, we basically kill intrinsic motivation? How does that work?
Yeah, so one of the things I looked for the book for Intrinsic, the book that's coming out as you mentioned, which I looked at tennis players like Roger Federer, for example, right? And these guys, they do, of course, their competition matters, rivalries matter. They care about Djokovic and Nadal. I don't know if you guys are tennis fans or not, but I think at the end of the day, when Roger Federer thinks about perfection and he plays the perfect set in his mind, the set is played against himself. He's not competing, right? So competition, it can be a short-term way of almost a trick we use to help us lift our game up. So there's no question if Nadal had not been around, he would not be the player he was, because Nadal forced him to think differently and raise his level of the game. But he's still playing. He's now almost 40. He played at Wimbledon. Unfortunately crashed out a couple of days ago. But he still loves the game. And I think that's mastery that is much more important. So I think things like competition, some of the extrinsic factors, they can be short-term tricks, like or promotions. If you want to go for the VP position, you're a year away. Yes, it's one way to give a little bit of short-term motivation. Long-term, though, what is very dangerous with all this stuff is it can breed this kind of comparison culture that I see so many young people now being almost like paralyzed by, right? So the problem now is if you want to be a writer, you can just go onto the web and or social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. There are thousands of writers out there. What makes you distinct? If you start looking at like that and trying to compare yourself, especially in a country as big as India, there's nowhere to go, right? Because you'll always feel like what I'm doing is not significant. So I think it's much better to be driven by the inside, by internal or intrinsic factors. most of the time. Occasionally, you can use these short-term tricks to, give you a little bit of short-term boost. But long-term, the more that GPS is anchored around these concepts of purpose, autonomy, and mastery, the more likely we are to flourish in our careers and lives more broadly.
We were actually just going to ask you the tennis question because of Wimbledon.
But here, hold on a second. I would love to ask a similar example. So, Sharath, why don't you help me figure out whether this particular example that I'll share now, whether that person is intrinsically motivated or not. So, let's say there's somebody who runs an NGO to help cancer patients, and but that person hates that job, and sometimes even that job takes a toll on that person. But that person still keeps at it because that person feels that he should help or she should help people in need, and that is basically what drives that person, but he doesn't or she doesn't necessarily like that job. So how do we classify whether that person is intrinsically motivated or not?
Yeah, so I think my belief strongly, Ruthridge, is that that all of us are intrinsically motivated, and there's a lot of evidence now. We all bring a high degree of this to work and to other parts of our lives. I mean, I've very rarely met someone in a cancer organization who wakes up in the morning saying, "I want to do harm to patients," right? Or to use that example, it's often the culture and systems around us that tend to create some of the cynicism and disengagement. So there are a couple of ways I'd look at this. So I'd say, look, if you think about this colleague in the cancer charity or NGO, first thing, what she's doing is intrinsically purposeful work, right? There's no question what she does helps and serves others. What might be happening is that her organization, her charity, has sliced and diced their organization in a way that she can't see the ultimate purpose of her work. And it's ironic, but I've run three fairly successful nonprofit organizations over the last 15 years. But it's not always easy, even though the work is inherently purposeful, to make the organization bring that out. So it might be that she's, stuck in a desk doing donor reports. I don't know what she does exactly, but that's a very classic example, right? She's writing reports to donors. It feels like a lot of paperwork. It feels like she's not really close to the ground. So one immediate thing she can do is to say, look, I'm going to write these reports. That's part of my job. I can't change that. I need that because the money, the foundations that fund this work need those reports. Instead, let me take that donor on a visit together. Let's go and actually meet some real patients who've benefited from the work. Let's talk about what went well with our work, but also what can we do to improve. Let's have a very honest relationship with the donor about how can they help us do that improvement. And let me go back to my CEO or my director of programs or whatever and share back some of these improvement ideas, right? So she's still doing the same job, but she's able to job craft. That's a word that is coming more and more up nowadays in thinking about new ways of people development. Job craft her role to bring out that inherent purpose in that, right? So I think there's a lot that can happen with that. She also might find she's very isolated, that she's working very, in a very isolated way. So she may say, okay, well, next time I do that, I'm going to make sure I'm part of some more regular teams. So all of my reporting is having much more feedback back from, I'm getting more direct contact with all the teams on the ground, but I'm also sharing back my learning and connecting donors back to those teams so they can see also the link with the people funding their work, right? So she's a great bridge builder in that example. This is hypothetical, but I'm just using it more to say that almost any job, especially in a social purpose context, I think can bring out that purpose more strongly. And I think leaders of organizations need to be thinking actively about how they can do that, not just waiting for chance and hoping that employees will just get this by accident.
And this begins at the very, from it, the culture is built in the workplace organization itself, like you said, job crafting. But oftentimes it also has to come from the person, right, to be intrinsically motivated. And that is a foundation that a lot of people build during their childhood. And as an education podcast, I'd like to come back to where it all begins, at school. So how do you think that the education system can change to create intrinsically motivated students, and how that will help them move forward in life?
Thanks, Hev. And I think that this is so important. I think if the education system can do one thing these days, it is not the knowledge or the facts and stuff, right? I'm not saying that some level of those are important still, but it's that deep love of learning and that ability to be a lifelong learner that will really build the foundations to be an intrinsically motivated, worker, parent, spouse, citizen, I think, in the future. It can be done later in life, and by certainly, but it's so much easier if it becomes a habit. It's like a muscle that we develop early on in our lives. And right now, sadly, and I think India is, is unfortunately a good an example of this, is that our systems very much more prioritize rote learning, memorization, facts, all these things. And I think it gives the wrong impression to students and parents, because what it says is that education is basically a big game we have to play to kind of get into a good college. Ultimately, that's usually the game, right? Instead of saying, actually, there's really intrinsic value in the education itself and in learning itself. The problem with that is, again, it uses extrinsic, motivators. So it uses certificates, diplomas, grades, ranks, all that stuff, admissions, tutors, and all of this crap. Sorry for my language here, but the challenge again is we start to think about education like a game. We go into the workforce with that same attitude, and then we don't have that conviction, that passion for the job, for learning and developing, that basically all of us are going to have to show now, I think, to our employers, to avoid being automated in terms of our jobs there. So I think it's so important education systems role model that. I was very proud of the last 10 years to have founded Stir Education NGO in India, but other countries as well, that reached about 30,000 schools in India. And I was working with government school teachers and officials to reignite their motivation so they could role model those foundations of lifelong learning. But, these areas, I think, of curiosity, critical thinking, communication, confidence, these are going to be so important for an education system to really prepare young people who are world ready, life ready, and job ready in the future. And right now, that link is very, very broken. And I'd love to see, part of the work I do practically is working with, for example, higher education organizations who are trying to challenge that and really produce something that is academically rigorous and challenging, but also is directly helping people in the world, the world they're going to go into. So more and more interdisciplinary thinking, for example, more active problem solving, more working with teams. And I think the worry I have right now in our systems is that not only are we being unhelpful to young people, such as yourself and going to college, but also we're almost promoting the exact opposite things that are going to be needed in the future. So our education systems are all about competition, as we discussed, right? In the future, I don't want employees competing with each other. I want them to be able to collaborate, to feel real, passion about helping others, seeing their successes, helping the whole team be successful. Of course, most of education is entirely individual ranked, and so it's almost the exact opposite of what we need in the world. And I think all of us who work in education, I would count myself still very much in that, we need to really challenge these paradigms and ask for a better future, I think.
Definitely. So, like you were talking about training teachers, let's say we have a school and there are a few teachers there. How would you go about, and let's assume that they are very extrinsically motivated, either extrinsically motivated or they are not motivated at all. So how would you get them from there to being very intrinsically motivated? What all would you do?
And that would be in an organization, you were saying, or in a school, or what was the
context? In a school, let's say, which has 30, 40 teachers.
Okay. So what I would probably do is I'd maybe start with the principal of the school and the teachers, them coming together and saying, look, what really is our purpose here? It's an amazing number of schools around the world, in India, but in the UK and in the US, other places I work, where if you ask that question to the principal, they'll say, my job is to meet some school league table, right? Or meet the inspection grade, for the school. That's not the purpose of a school. The purpose is to really help and serve its students. I would ask, and I'd be very specific at what community am I in? What kind of kids are coming to the school? Let's say they're in the, perhaps on some of the poorer suburbs of Delhi, where I used to do a lot of work, where for many times the kids are first generation learners, right? Their parents have never been to school before. Let's imagine that's the context. So what I would say as a principal is, look, the reality is for many kids in that setting, many will end up in the informal sector, right? That's how many of our jobs in India are being created. What are the key things they need to be able to do to succeed in that world? There are almost no rules in the informal sector, as we know. There are often, you have to be very persistent. You've got to be very entrepreneurial. You've got to be creating opportunities. No one is likely to give you any on a plate. You may be moving between different kinds of jobs. Have to be very responsive, for example. So how do you then create that an education that really builds those foundations? So, for example, if it's about reacting quickly to problems, which is going to be a key feature, how do we teach things where there is a lot of flexibility? So you might teach maths, for example, and say, okay, let's talk about fractions. But you may want to constantly shift the kind of questions you ask. So students are able to think on their feet and think quickly about what they're learning. So I think it's all about thinking about, okay, what is the world our young people are going to enter into? And in India, I'm just using an example there, but in India, half of our jobs will be in the informal sector in the future. Countries like Ethiopia, maybe up to 90%. So if that's the world that, this fast changing, unpredictable world that our young people are going to enter into, what can I do as a principal and teacher to build those into how and what I'm teaching? The what I'm teaching is often, unfortunately, dictated by the syllabus and the portions and all that stuff that we don't have a lot of control over. How we teach we have a lot of autonomy over, and we can make it very engaging, very interactive, and teach these concepts in a way that really brings out these broader skills that will be so essential for the future.
Great. So here, do you have any other questions? I've run out of questions now.
Yeah, so I just wanted to build on what you said on education and how there's very little autonomy in the way teachers can actually craft and create intrinsic motivation because of the way our curriculum is created. Uh, is there any fundamental problem with the way we look at education as a society, and how can fixing that sort of fix this hierarchical problem of intrinsic motivation in education?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. And in the book, I was talking about this. So we built 10 lakh schools in India, right? Government schools. It's an incredible achievement by the government, and successive governments were part of that. It took us till 2019, 2020 to develop our first national education plan in India. And it's just a good example of, I talked about this idea of kind problems and wicked problems, that building schools is a kind problem. Yeah, there's so much cement, some planning, some architects, and some construction, and you've got the schools. That was a big achievement. I want to be very clear. But the challenge of what is education for? That's a much deeper question. And I think the new education policy is making some good strides in that direction in India. But that idea of having conversations with citizens, with employers, with young people themselves, with teachers, and saying, what do we need for the future now? I think there's so much we need to be able to do around that much more systemically, and be open to what comes out of that process. I think we're doing so many things in education now that because we've always done it that way, and it can be scary to try something new because we know that there's always change. That change is always we can be fearful sometimes, but we have such a benign environment in India in terms of, despite our challenges, we've got so many young people entering the workforce every year. Crores of young people often, right, coming in. That's an incredible legacy for a country. We have that really powerful economic workforce coming in. And I think, I'm always impressed by the ingenuity, innovation, just sense of adventure of so many, fellow Indians, right, out there as well, who really want to make a difference in the world and want to move ahead and contribute. How can we harness that energy? Right now, it feels like our education systems they're actually preventing that from happening, honestly, right? And I think, how can we just take a new lens to this and say, let's design and put intrinsic motivation at the core of everything we do in education. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be the center of how the education experience looks like. How can we make sure every child, goes in learning and seeing the purpose of their learning, feels that autonomy in the classroom, as you said, and feels they're mastering things that are not just mugging up or rote learning, but mastering skills that are genuinely useful for the future. I think it's a really important agenda ahead of us in that regard.
Yeah, so that was all of the questions we had. Rutvij, if you want to ask anything else.
Yeah, actually, I do have a question. So, Sharath, you've been running so many organizations in the education space, getting people to get become more intrinsically motivated and everything. So I'm assuming that you have run multiple experiments and you must have failed a few experiments. So I would love to know what all those failures were and what were the reasons behind those failures, what were the successes and what were the reasons behind those successes.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. It's a great question. I think even Stir itself, when we set up about 10 years ago, it was not built on motivation. Actually, it was really more the idea of trying to find teaching solutions, innovations from teachers we could share. And what we learned by accident was that by looking for these ideas, we were accidentally igniting the motivation of teachers. And that wasn't how we started. But the big learning was we'd confused the baby and the bathwater, in that regard. So for me, the big learning has been once that insight was there, having the courage to go ahead and to put that into practice, right, and make that the core. That became the core of Stir, and it's amazing how much difference that made in terms of igniting the minds of both teachers and students, right, and officials in India across 3 or 4 states over the last 10 years. So I think that idea of just having courage, I think, to say, look, we have to think differently. Let's not just put this to the sideline. Let's make it core, and let's build around those principles. That's really been the core, and I think it's a very similar analogy for anyone in the young person. It's very easy here to be a doctor, right? I mean, if your parents are and so on, you'll have connections, you'll have lots of pressure, all these things. So I really applaud you for doing something different. But then I think it requires a lot more thoughtfulness, a lot more design, and just a lot of thinking of where am I trying to go ultimately? What really drives me as a person? How do I set up my life around that so that can happen overall? And what I'm also finding across my work is that that what we do in our careers and education and those lives has a massive impact on our motivation more widely. So if we're if we're happy and fulfilled and motivated in our work life or our school life, we're going to be better partners or parents, for example. Many times I think what happens is that parents themselves are not motivated in what they do. They then want to live their lives and dreams through their children. And you get into a vicious cycle you can never break because it becomes intergenerational as well. And I think we need to change, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is how do we change our parenting behaviors, our behaviors as spouses, our partners, our behavior as citizens, to also be more motivating and therefore allow the young generation, who we have a big custodial responsibility for them to live a more fulfilled life themselves.
Definitely, but Sharath, I was expecting maybe if you could run us through any of the experiments that you have done and maybe gained a few insights, and if you could share those insights with us, that'll be very useful.
Yeah, so one of the let me give one example, which is around for example, at Stir, one of the things we looked at the role of extrinsic incentives at Ridge. So what would happen with teachers, for example, around things like incentives? What would happen by recognition from officials, those kinds of things? So non-financial. They were not like massive money focus areas, but we found those actually were not very powerful. They didn't make much difference. And if you look at pay in India, it's a strange story, but there was a natural experiment the government did. It raised teacher salaries significantly, probably almost 5x over a 15, 20-year period over the last 20 years. If you look at things like how much time teachers spend teaching in class, that has not gone up a lot over that period, despite these very sharp increases in pay. And Indian government teachers are actually relatively well paid in most contexts, relative to our per capita income in India. So I think those big experiments that we ran ourselves, but also the government effectively ran, they just show again and again that these things like pay, status, incentives, bonuses, rewards, all these things, they are like these hygiene factors. They can stop us being demotivated, but they're not a source of deep motivation along the way.
That's a great insight there. I've also heard that many teachers hire other people who are not even teachers, and they go and teach in these government schools, and also, and I'm assuming that they are still getting paid. So that's a great insight there.
No, that's been the problem. I think the problem, once you take this incentive route, what we tend to do is we tend to find the fastest way to get that incentive, right? The fastest way is take the money and get someone else to do it. The idea of a guru in India is thousands of years old, right? Such a long-standing part of our tradition, but it's been wiped out through what's become sometimes a very cynical culture in the teaching force. So that's why I think going back to purpose and trying to remind teachers of the purpose of what they do, they have such an influential role for the young generation. And one of the stories that inspired Stir was the story of a parent who was told by his child's own teacher, that a son of a donkey will always be a donkey. So a son of a donkey will always be a donkey. If that's the kind of mindset that a teacher has, there's no hope, right, for the next generation. We've got to change that in the teaching force and reignite that motivation of teachers in our country.
Definitely. Cool. I think that's about it here, right? Great
Yeah.
insights there from you, Sharath. Thank you so much for all the insights. Yeah.
No, thanks. Really great to join you guys. And yeah, but just again, as you were saying here at the beginning, the book Intrinsic is out on Amazon.in and other sites. Please look it up. I think what I've tried to do is it's been years of really painful research, storytelling, investigating lots of things, and trying to help really practically find. It's not like a simple guide, but a way to think about these issues differently, to really help us in these key areas of work and education, parenting, citizenship that we talked about in a very practical. A lot of the stories are based in India, and it was, I think, given everything that we've gone through the pandemic these last 3-4 months especially, it's been such a tough period, right? And I really feel for everyone who's been affected. And I still have a lot of family in India, even though I'm based in London now. I really hope the book will help us all kind of get out of this sort of very, very challenging phase and help us step up and really rise up for the really great opportunities ahead.
Definitely. I'm really looking forward to that book myself, and we'll share all. By the time we release this podcast, I'm sure the book will be out, and we'll share all the details in the descriptions. So yeah, great talking.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us.